Welcome, Black.
Welcome, Black. You are listening to the Seeds of Revolution, Daughters of the Whirlwind podcast,
where we discuss legacy, history, resistance, and forward movement.
The revolution is live.
Hey
sisters.
Hey y'all. I got my sisters. Every time I see y'all, that's how I feel. It's like a song that plays.
Oh.
I saw something recently and it made me think of all of y'all and Ayana and Fatiha too, where it said, imagine going back all those years, like when you shared a room with your sister and listening. Like, imagine if you had recorded those conversations when the lights went out.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought of Ayana because we shared rooms, but I thought of all of y'all and like all the conversations that we've had and just all the richness, of our childhood and our sisterhood. So precious.
Oh, I love it.
I didn't have to share a room with y'all, but
Yeah, I know.
I just shared a room with Ayana, and that was for a little time.
Very small. So small, I don't even remember.
Yeah, I think I only shared a room with Ayana.
Yeah, you did. Because I was like, not. No.
You was like, nah.
We were on road. I even remember at Avon, I even moved to that little room.
Oh yeah, on the side.
The little room.
Like
you love that little space.
Like it's kind of like
you loved it. You made it your little space too.
Yeah.
That was like, I was like, nope, y'all can have your own room. I will go right in here.
And you happily did.
Yeah. It was cute too.
Yeah.
It was.
And I remember why we did that. Because that was right after our grandfather Elijah passed. And Taywan didn't want to sleep in the room ever again. Like, she was like, no, not doing it.
I was
traumatized.
It's so ironic that we're talking about that because the anniversary of the 30th year,
right,
of the passing of his
passing. Yeah. Get you all choked up, right?
It's just like, and we brought that up because that was the reason, that was the catapult of us all having those moving parts. And that little room was I just loved it. And that was honestly the first time I lived in there after he passed. He came to visit me in that space.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be, this would be the 31st year?
31st?
Yeah, because he passed in 1994.
You're right. Yeah. I'm just thinking I was 17 then.
Yeah.
And it happened before I turned 18. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
But. Yeah. I was 11. So folks, we're talking about our grandfather, the General Elijah Adegbalola, who passed away on June 24th, 1994. Yeah. So yeah. So salute to
the General.
Yes.
Thank you to him because
a little peanut butter.
Yes.
And I was able to get a little.
I can't have anymore because I can't have peanuts.
Yeah.
I was able to get my bedroom nook. So, I mean, some things, you gotta look at the brighter side in life.
Yeah, and I was so shook because he actually passed in my bed. Like they laid him in my bed. I wasn't in the bed. Just folks were like, what's going on? They told me to get out of the bed, and then they laid him in the bed. And I remember he took his last breath in the bed. And it was hours after, he died.
Yeah, he passed. Yeah.
We all heard the moan, like the sound.
Yeah. I remember that.
So that was really kind of like my first introduction also to like transitioning and not knowing that it was going to be something that we would, come up against.
Yeah. I don't even remember who called me. Aunt Laverne called me. I do remember. Mm-hmm. And I was at work and I lost it.
Yeah.
I
was still in New York.
Elijah.
We didn't have a phone, so I had to go to the payphone.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And I remember we had to, I think Auntie Laverne reached out to Auntie Kasima because her Auntie Wakila had just got to, no, Auntie Wakila didn't go, but Auntie Kasima and Mom Bahati had just got to Japan.
Oh wow.
Same day. Mm-hmm. And they had to turn.
And look at all the connections.
Yeah. So
we know the connection, but our guest today, there's a connection to Japan.
Yeah. So
you'll learn about shortly. But those who have died have never left. The dead are not under the earth. Yeah. Yeah, I've been feeling his spirit and just the spirits of our parents too a lot. Like since we last met, and just more and more. I think since their transition, since Daddy's transition, it's just so potent and so powerful. I love that, the conversation went from sisterhood to ancestorhood. Our first experiences with that, which is again another connection to what we're talking about today. We have a very special guest. All our guests are so special. But this person is the granddaughter of the woman who held the body of Malcolm X, as he took his last breaths. And that woman's name was Yuri Kochiyama. Sister Yuri, Mama Yuri is somebody who was a comrade and friend of our parents. We consider family, a sweet woman, sweet little woman.
She was. She was one of the few people who could, well, not even could. Mommy wouldn't challenge her.
Yes.
We would get there, and if I said I wanted something and she said yes, I look at Mommy, and Mommy would just turn. She wouldn't even say nothing because she know Yuri would have been like, "Leave that baby alone."
Right.
If I knew if I wanted something sweet and I'm going to Yuri's, I'm getting it. I'm like,
It was so gentle and just nurturing.
She was so sweet. She came to my wedding. I don't know if y'all remember that.
I remember.
I have a picture.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
She always, no matter where, what was going on, if it was something important to family, especially those she considered family, she showed up. And that was the beauty in it, and just being a little girl to be able to see her as a teenager, it was just like in awe, and even to have people, I've had people come to me and be like, I saw your colorings when you were 6 years old on Yuri Kochiyama's refrigerator. Like,
wow.
Yeah, because we would always leave something.
Yeah.
She would encourage it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she was very engaging. Because a lot of adults can tend to be dismissive to children or like, go that way. Or just ignore you altogether. But she was very like, oh no, I recognize your presence and I'm going to honor that. And it was authentic. I really appreciate that about her.
Yeah.
And, we do not in any way want to just reduce her to the person who held the body of Malcolm X. So we're going to talk a lot about, who she is. Because as I said,
so many layers.
As I said earlier, those who have died have never left. So we're not speaking in the past tense, but who she continues to be through the work of her granddaughter. And so, Efuata, Princess Mdaiyah.
Yes. So we are, just very pleased and just very honored to have our sister Akemi Kochiyama here with us today. We are going to bring her to the stage. Hey, Akemi. Hey. You're on mute, sis. You're on mute.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's good to see everyone.
Yes. So
welcome.
Thank you.
To our platform. Thank you for even accepting the invitation to come forward. And
thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm going to read your bio, but I just wanted to just give a little background to why we even chose to bring Akemi on today. During probably 2 years ago when Baba Uncle Mutulu had passed, Akemi and I somebody was like, you should call Akemi, and there's a lot of things y'all should talk about and just bring back. And so we just started talking, and it was just like the stories. We was just talking for about an hour, just going back and forth about just the stories and the connections, and how, even though we're all grown and doing our own thing, we're still connected to the root, to the foundation of who our parents and our grandparents were and our aunts and uncles. And one thing we said was we was going to stay in touch now and even start to implement different, programs and things that we could all do together that heightens not just who our ancestors or, our legacies, but the things that we're doing so that our children can be more involved as well, because we all have children now, and our children, don't all pretty much know each other like the way we all know each other. So I just wanted to, give that little understanding of, why we're here today, and then connecting the dots of who we are. So here we have Sister Akemi Kochiyama-Ladson. She is a Harlem-based writer, scholar, activist, and nonprofit consultant. The granddaughter of human rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, Akemi is the co-editor of Passing It On, a memoir by Yuri Kochiyama, and co-director of the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project, YKSP, where she leads outreach and education programs centered in history and solidarity. The mission of the YKSP is to carry on Yuri's commitment to working in support of struggles and movements for civil and human rights, and providing opportunities for students and educators, artists and activists, communities and movements to come together to learn, build, and organize at the intersections of social justice. Akemi's writing and work is focused on cross-racial, cross-movement solidarity, self-education, and BIPOC community building, BIPOC community building. Thank you, Akemi, for joining us once again. And we're honored to have you here today.
Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you. It's so interesting to see your faces. I know, I sent pictures. I found some pictures of you guys as like kids.
I'm sure you have. Yeah. Your grandmother's house, your grandparents' house, to me, like in Harlem, I was saying to my sisters earlier, my mother couldn't tell her no. So if I said, Yuri, can I have? She would say yes, and I knew I was getting it. So
yeah, so many people pass through that house,
Oh my God.
I still live on the same street, so I passed
Oh,
through.
wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if those walls could talk, my goodness. So for our listeners, I believe, a good amount may know or may have heard the name Yuri Kochiyama. But could you do us the honor of telling us and telling our audience a little bit about your grandmother?
Okay, well, thank you. I would say that Yuri, I say first and foremost, she was an activist, right? For, for human rights, for social justice. But she was really, I would say she was a soldier on the front lines, right? Of numerous movements, of many interconnected movements, and united struggles for human rights, for social justice, who worked, mainly in Harlem for her first 40 years, maybe from 1960 to 2000. But then she moved to Oakland in 2000, and then she continued her work there, for another decade. But, I think she's a really important activist, that people should know more about now because of really her commitment to sort of broad solidarity, right? In a broad struggle against white supremacy and imperialism, right? Really, which I think, she defined herself as an anti-imperialist, as a radical international anti-imperialist first and foremost, because, it was really about what she learned from Malcolm, right, was that, it was really first and foremost about human rights and human dignity for everyone, right, for all oppressed people. And I think that was, what was most radical about Yuri was the broadness of that, right, and the way that she applied that to sort of everyone she met, on a daily basis in her practice, as a human, right, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a family member, in everything that she did. So I think, she's a really, important activist in that for that reason. I think, especially in this moment, in his, where history has really been suppressed, criminalized, and one of the really, Yuri's a part of this really, she's one part of a long history of united struggles and movements and people working together, right? And, the powers that be would really like us not to know about that, right? That history, it isn't taught in school. People don't know about this. And now it's being, the history of everyone of color in this country, all marginalized or oppressed people is being, suppressed. And I think, I spent the last 25 years really organizing Yuri's archives, and really it's been interesting to watch sort of what's happening in the world in the meantime, and how increasingly important the archive has become to me, and then to a lot of people, as a evidence of a lot of things around a lot of different movements, but that were interconnected. And I think it's an important history that I'm really committed to people knowing more about now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. So describe the moment when you realized who your grandmother was outside of just being your grandmother. How old were you, if you remember?
I totally remember. So I would say, I was born in 1971, right? Early 1970s. Both my father and my stepfather were both Black Panthers. I grew up in Harlem and the Manhattanville Project. So, I think, in that world, also my mom was a, single mom most of the time, had several jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs at a single time. So I was always with my grandparents, I was with them a lot, in their house. And if I was at home with them, they were always preparing or cleaning up from a meeting, a lunch, a dinner, a party, a meeting, something that happened, overnight guest, something. So you were like, always doing that. Or I was out in the street with Yuri, like going to the copy shop to make flyers, going to the post office to do mailings, handing out flyers on 125th Street, going to, all of these things. And I thought this was very normal because, this was, how our lives were. And because a lot of my friends growing up, even the building I lived in Harlem, a lot of our parents were artists, activists, educators, whose lives were very similarly complex and doing all these things and in these very interconnected communities. And I think I was in that bubble, for a long time. And I thought, this is just how people live. And then I went to college and I started to meet a lot of young people my age and talk about my life in New York and Harlem. And it was so foreign to people, just like the way that my life was. But then also I started meeting professors and scholars and activists who knew Yuri personally, who worked with her, who knew her in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, because I went to college in 89. So there was decades of people who had worked with her who were now professors or activists or scholars or heads of, organizations. So that started to happen. And then I started to think of her outside of my life as my busy grandma, and I started to realize that she had more of an impact. And then I would say by the time I was graduating college, maybe mid-90s, she started to become a part of Asian American studies curriculum and stuff like that. And so I think, as a family, we started to be more aware of it. But I would say it was right when so I'd say in college is when I became aware of it. But as I was graduating, my grandfather passed, right? My senior year, I was at Spelman College and I was in Atlanta. And my grandfather passed. And so I had to kind of step into a lot of the stuff that he was doing, right? Because all of my grandparents' children had moved to California. And I really started to realize, how incredibly busy and complex her life was, and on the road and, traveling and speaking and the speeches and keeping track of all the stuff and the mailings. And I had to step into that and shopping and cooking and all of that stuff, because my grandfather really did all of those things. And I started to also realize how complex that life was, right, on the road, outside of our family, which I had never, really seen before. And I started to travel with her, and go with her to, when she was on the college speaking circuit, or just go with her to high schools and schools around New York City. And that was a very interesting experience, I think, to start to see her in that way as I got older.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, that's powerful. And it's kind of, it's a common thing that I've noticed a lot of times in growing up in these lifestyles. You don't know it's all normal to us until we leave home to go to college or, move on our own. And then people are like, that's not, that's not how we grew up. And you're like, what? Like, so I get it. And the similarity of that is powerful.
Yeah, and outside of New York, I think in the bubble that I was in, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it was a very multicultural, multiracial, many movements. It was, we were always at all these different kinds of things, and it was very normal, right? And it wasn't, we felt very well, Yuri was very welcome. I felt very welcome. Everyone felt very, in all these spaces. And so, it's interesting how much people don't have those experiences, and it's not normal.
Right. So one of the questions, that I know a lot of people are interested in is, how did you come, well, you kind of answered that a little bit, but just further to, how did you come to do the work you're doing, the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project, to keep her legacy alive? And then who is able to access her archives, which you so graciously manage?
Sure, thank you. So a couple of things. I started to talk about it. So my grandfather Bill, he passed away in 1993, and he was really like her manager. He was like her, her partner in crime, her manager. Everything. He was doing everything, and so he passed away, and I really had to step into a lot of these roles. But one of those things was dealing with her bookings, right, for like her itineraries, for all these college things, and like all this stuff, right, transportation, all this stuff, and I started traveling with her. But also I started to just be in the house more constantly and see the steady traffic of scholars, activists, artists coming in and to look at her stuff, at her archives. And a lot of times they were taking things with them, right? And, they would just be looking at stuff for months or organizing stuff for months, and then they would leave with like 10 boxes or, 2 boxes or, lots of stuff. And, Yuri was very non-proprietary, right? So she would be like, take it, whatever. And I started to pay more attention, having graduated college. And then sort of as I got, a little older, I was, starting to apply. I was starting graduate school in cultural anthropology, and I started to think about this as an archive, I think, for the first time, as I started to get a little older and be witness to how many people were coming in and out. But it was like activists and artists, it was the media, it was, libraries and institutions, but also really interestingly, it was like tons and tons of students, college students, and young people, right? So I would go with her sometimes to elementary school, sometimes to junior high schools. Sometimes it was a room of 20 kids. Sometimes it was a college with, 700 people in an auditorium. It really, varied. But it was really interesting for me to see how much she loved being with young people and how incredibly fueled and energized she was, even as she got older, like really energized by being around young people, but how interested they were in her was also like fascinating, to watch, half the time, as she's getting older and stuff, half the time she would remember like my name, calling me all kind, like different names in my family and stuff, but she could really connect with people. She could recall history really easily, amazingly. But no matter what, like the history of everything political, she could remember. And then she could really impart something very important to those kids, right? That seemed like they really got what was good about solidarity and human rights, you know, talking to her, you know, whatever age they were. And I think that was a really important experience to have. And I started to realize like there was a real importance to her story and the way that she was communicating with people for young people, that it engaged them, and that we should be thinking about that, you know. So I started all of those things happening simultaneously, you know, and me starting this graduate program. I started to think about, you know, maybe we should start to think about who's all these people leaving with boxes, where did those boxes go, who has what, you know. And then she starts giving me like lists of universities and people, and you know, and I start to like track it down, you know, and you know, find out, you know, did she sign things? You know, it was a very complicated, long process, but she was happy to sort of relinquish that part of it, and I think she actually realized it was kind of important too. And she did sort of gave me and my aunt Audie, you know, her oldest daughter, sort of intellectual property rights, and just the ability to just deal with all the legacy and IP, well, you know, the IP stuff, right? So we started to track down everything, and then we started to find out, you know, just what were the terms of everything. And that took about, so I'd say it's been over 25 years, 25 years ago that we started this work. And over that time, we officially had all the archives that she sent to UCLA, Asian American Studies Center. She sent those boxes there in the late 1990s. It took me some years to like track them down and find them in deep storage and negotiate with the university for years, until they really came out with the funding and the ability to really organize the archive there. And now they've digitized more than 4,000 items. And there's a Yuri Kochiyama digital collection online. I can share the link with you all during the chat, and you can share it with people. But it's really incredible what they've been able to do with that archive. So that's like all her Asian American studies stuff. Everything from her family, from like the World War II, you know, from like right before World War II, I would say through the 1980s and 90s. So all the Asian American political stuff, flyers, newsletters, posters, meeting notes, every organization she was involved with, all of that stuff. So it was about 300 boxes. So that became about 4,000 digitized items. So that's all up online now at UCLA. We launched it about 2 years ago. And they do ongoing programs. And my understanding is that they're trying to get more items that people can look at in person, you know, like the actual, you know, make it easier for people to look at items when they go and really to hold things in their hands. But right now, we're really pleased with the fact that so much of it is available online.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, that is
a long time, but it was worth it. And I continue to find things in there that surprised me that I didn't know about my own family. So that was really cool. So then we spent the last 15 years working with a number of universities trying to find the best place, and we ended up landing with Columbia University Rare Books and Manuscripts Library, which is managed by the Lehman Center for American History, and that's in the Butler Library on Columbia's campus on 114th Street. And actually, it is fully accessible. We also gave over 300 boxes to them. That is all of her Black liberation, international movements, civil rights, all her Malcolm correspondence, sort of everything that she did in Harlem, that was sort of Harlem-based. So that's all at Columbia University. Anyone, you don't have to be a student there, or you don't even have to be a student. Anyone with a valid ID and an email address can make an appointment online. And actually still, even with all the crazy stuff happening on the campus, you can actually make an appointment, and they send you a QR code, and you just go to the campus gate with the QR code and your ID, and you go into the library and you have access. You can actually go online and see what's in. They have all the boxes listed by category, and then you can say, oh, I want to see these boxes, so that when you get there, they've actually pulled them for you already. So it's very, and you have them, I think, for the day or a couple hours. So so those got placed. They went public about 3 years ago, but we just had a conference to publicly launch them this past May.
Wow.
In Harlem. But yeah, so, that's a bit, it's an incredible experience to do that, but also, an interesting also relationship to be in with Columbia University at this moment, in time. And, but, one of the things, just to be clear, one of the things that was so important to us as a family was who could guarantee the most public access to the archive. And after talking to, it took 25 years because we talked to everybody who does archives, Princeton, Stanford, UMass, all the schools that have big Black liberation archives. Those are the schools actually that have them. Columbia was the only one that guaranteed a lot of things, public access, in perpetuity, our family's intellectual property rights in perpetuity, and then also the proximity to Harlem. I think was really important to us. And I don't know if you guys know, you guys know 120, Manhattanville is literally, it's a 10-minute walk from the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, right? So, you could walk down Broadway and you're there in 10 minutes. So one of the things I'm working on is developing programs so that students and young people who live in Manhattanville can actually come to the archives at, the Rare Book and Manuscript Library and have access, right? And, their own history, what happened in Manhattanville, and that's been, a really important sort of inspiration point is I did some workshops in the Manhattanville projects about 10 years ago. And I was so amazed by how inspired and moved and excited young, Black and Latino kids in Manhattanville now were learning about Yuri and all the people, including Malcolm and all these people that came to Manhattanville projects. They felt so proud of that. I think in a way that really, sort of changed my perspective about how do we engage with young people growing up in these communities now about their own history, like where they live. They don't even know, so it was, I think that was a really big part of us also choosing Columbia, because Columbia is willing to make that space available to, kids in Harlem.
Wow. Yeah. Congratulations to you.
The amount of stuff you said, I'm like,
wow. Yeah, how big is the archive?
It's very large. So I don't know how many boxes it got broken into. There was 300 boxes that went, just Asian American stuff that went to UCLA. And then I told you it's more than 4,000 objects. And actually, when you go online, one of those objects might be a scrapbook that's like 25 pages. So, it's way more than 4,000 pages.
Right.
Going on and on. Yeah. Includes photographs, all kinds of stuff. What's in... New York is just really, it's incredible how much they were able to organize everything. So lately, what's been great is the last couple of years, I've done some lectures in the archives with students in the racial literacies teaching program there. So all these young students learning about this archive, and I've seen some amazing zines that some of these students are doing using archives. I mean, like mind-blowing stuff that these graduate students are doing, in the archive. So anyway, one of the things I recently read was a dissertation of the graduate student. It was a young South Asian woman who got the job. She was a graduate student who had like a work study job, and she got the job of opening the 300 boxes that we sent to Columbia. So she spent the whole year of her life opening the boxes, right? And then she had never heard of Yuri. Wow. She was from London. She's South Asian. She's from London. And she opened the boxes, and then she ended up writing a dissertation about it. So I just read her dissertation. It was about a year ago I read it. And it's so good. And it's really crazy to read it by someone who never met her, never heard of her. So the funniest thing is, and you guys would appreciate this, I don't know if you remember, every time you went to Yuri's house, you had to sign in the guest book. Right? You had to sign a guest book. There were certain things you had to do all the time, right? Then also, so that all of the guest books are in the archive, right? And wow. So my husband says, like, he thinks that's the most fun part of it is like looking through the guest books and everybody who came, right? Because it has like their name, their address for like 40 years, everybody who came through. So that's one thing. But then all of her mailing, her address books are also in the archive. So I don't know if you remember what her address books look like, but she had several of them, and they were organized in different ways about, like in her mind, how they worked, right? But it was, she told me so that she could do mailings. So everything was color coded. Are you a person into Black liberation? Are you into, Puerto Rican independence? Are you into, what are you into? So she was, are you into theater? Are you into, whatever? So she would organize her mailing. So they have all of those in the archive. So this student really got a really great understanding of the kind of person Yuri was. And she wrote that basically she wrote her dissertation about the praxis of solidarity, about what's the daily praxis for an activist, what's the praxis of solidarity, not just your politics, but Yuri's praxis. So she came out with this theory that I love, or this idea that Yuri practiced radical hospitality. Right, and that was her solidarity praxis, was incredible hospitality. Having people in your home 365 days a year, 40 years in a row, and some of them are strangers who need a place to sleep, and some of them are, people, who, whatever, visiting, or need a meeting, or need to use your typewriter, or use, whatever it is, so many different kinds of people came there, and I'd say, mainly for fun, for socializing. Actually, but I thought it was great that she really captured like the warmth of that and all the love of that, and that was really, it really didn't matter if it was political. It was really just about being hospitable. So anyway, so it's a really interesting, thing, and this is all through this archive experience, right? Her just reading through these boxes, So anyway, it's been an interesting experience for me, I think, to watch people, and I keep meeting like graduate students. I met these dancers recently who took one of Yuri's speeches and did a dance, like a solo dance piece to her speech, and that was like. So amazing. A couple of different dancers have done this. So it's so interesting to see, how people interpret, archive in different kinds of ways, right? And these are super young people, like in their 20s, and, they would never have met Yuri, but I think these are all people of color too, who I think really feel, something it really strikes them as important.
Yeah. They feel a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the young lady who did her dissertation on it. Like, that's amazing.
I would love to read that. And I love that theory of radical hospitality. You may have heard us, but we were talking about spirit early on in the conversation. Yeah. And as you were talking, I'm a person that loves to ask like multiple questions. So they'll kind of be in what I'm saying right now, and you can respond to it if you like. But as you were talking, I was thinking about just you and your spirit and what drew you, because, like we talked about, we in so many ways inherit, the work of our parents, of our grandparents, ancestors. And I believe a lot of that work is spirit work, right? And, going back to the theory of radical hospitality, like moving beyond the social, the cultural, the political, but just heart, just having that open heart. And it made me think about, okay, in the same way that these youth were drawn to the work, you also were drawn to it because you're the granddaughter, but you didn't have to, you're not obligated or required to carry on this legacy. And so I'm curious as to, what is it that's within you that said, okay, I am the one, I am the one. I don't know if you were appointed. Maybe you were appointed. Yeah. I don't know.
But no, some of my family members are like, thank God you wanted to do this. Right? Yeah. It's just so happy to have somebody else do it. Right. But I'd say it's a couple of things. I think growing up in that household, I was with Yuri, trailing her, to the post office and, doing the mailings and literally walking with her on the street. And I say, a lot of people don't know how much Yuri supported the arts and grassroots theater and the Black arts movement in the 1960s and 70s. And I'd say, I feel like I went to all those performances with her, right, as a child, and, just sort of growing up in that, I think I thought it was really beautiful. It was like really beautiful, people just are really beautiful, at least in that world, in that experience.
Right.
And I think it's been great for me to travel and go other places and, go to places, go to an HBCU and be in Atlanta and, and then go, I ended up at one point going to London, when I was in college, and I did a semester there, and just being in different spaces, seeing how much history people don't know, how ahistorical people are, how narrow people's understandings are of things and of people, and how they can be and how people can interact as humans. It's actually like shocking to me. Sometimes I think over time I've realized, that, I'm very lucky to have grown up in the very progressive, mixed, bubble I was in Harlem in the 70s and 80s at that time. And a lot of us who grew up in that time, right? Grew up in that, you guys grew up in that space too. And I think there was a lot of struggle and a lot of, growing up in that environment. Also, there was times and things that were scary and disruptive or, not smooth or whatever. But I think that we saw a lot of courage and beauty and love, incredible levels of generosity and love. And I think I just always wanted to be in that space. I think that and I still do, and luckily, because of the work I'm doing now, we're developing freedom schools. When about 10 or 11 years ago, we did this Yuri Malcolm mural project in Harlem, and I worked with all these young activists who were also artists and educators, and we ended up doing 7 public workshops throughout New York City, so that it could be designed by a community, multiple communities, right? So I worked with these amazing artists who know how to organize such a thing. And we did everything from, we did a Know Your Rights workshop for like 500 high school students at the Audubon Ballroom, where Malcolm was martyred. We did a public whole day event at the Brooklyn Museum with like families and children. We presented in all kinds of communities, and including the Manhattanville projects. And it was such an incredible, rich experience. And people were just so interested, so energized, so loving and generous. I still run into kids who were involved with painting the Yuri Malcolm mural in Manhattanville, and they feel very protective of the wall. They have a lot of ownership. It's great. It's like become like their story, as well. So I feel like all of that makes me feel like, very inspired to keep doing this work. And I think, watching what's happening, sort of on a national level and an international level in terms of, the telling of history or suppression of history, I think is so important to be involved in this work around archives, which is why we're, developing this Freedom School model, so that we can start, a way of, again, going back to that tradition, because how do we educate ourselves and self-educate outside of formal educational institutions, right? Which are not the places to learn those things anymore.
Right.
So
absolutely.
How do we keep doing that and empowering ourselves in that way? So I feel, just very excited. Like, I feel like that's one of the things I could be doing now to address what's happening.
Absolutely. I look forward to getting in those archives. Yes. And I didn't realize that it was so extensive. So, I mean, again, I said congratulations and just thank you for that work, because it's so important. As we know, all of our stories are being erased or co-opted. So it's so important when our stories and our legacy, like in tangible ways, are in the hands of people who actually understand, and who love, who actually have love for the people, like the person behind all of the material. So I appreciate you for that. And talking about this moment, you mentioned, what's happening on the national, international scene. And your grandmother was such a principled person, activist, movement builder, comrade, as it related to solidarity. You talked about that guest book, for example, that had, I would love to look through that myself, look at the diversity, of people. But we're also in an age, I appreciate, the examples you provided, you know, the doctoral student and the different students who are engaged in the material, inspired by the material. At the same time, we have a lot of folks who don't understand solidarity, who don't understand the importance of it, and who, you know, may look at like the ICE detentions, for example, or what's happening in Palestine and other places, you know, throughout the world as, you know, not our fight. You know, that's their problem. That's a them thing. What would Yuri Kochiyama instruct us, or instruct, you know, those who feel as if, you know, our struggles are disparate and separate? How can her legacy help to instruct us in this moment?
So I would say I'm pretty sure that Yuri would probably, you know, quote Malcolm, right, and say that, you know, she learned from Malcolm how important it is to know your own history, right, and then also other people's history, right, because if you really know your own history and you know other people's history, you actually know that your histories intersect, they overlap, things that have happened to other people have happened to you, or, you know, vice versa, you know, that our histories are connected and our struggles are connected, right? So the more that you study history, you know, Malcolm was a big scholar of history, right? He really understood, he studied, you know, revolutions in the third world and what happened in Asia and Latin America, and he understood, you know, what the relationship was to what was happening to Black people in the United States, and that it was not an isolated event, right? So I think, you know, Yuri would always credit Malcolm with understanding that, and I think I would say that it's pretty clear to me that really understanding our histories, then as humans, right, we would understand those, for those people who don't think that what's happening to immigrants impacts them, right? Just, you know, if they just, you know, go a generation back or two or three, you know, probably not even more than one generation back, right? They could relate to this experience, or, you know, to the danger, to you know, to this insecurity, right, of this experience. So I think, and also, you know, what the future could be for all of us, right? It's all connected, right? Anything that's happening to any humans, right? We're all related to each other, right? And connected in many ways. So I would say that I think the more people know about their own stories and about what has happened in the world, that I think it would be impossible not to have more empathy, right? And compassion for people. And I think, you know, that's the whole purpose, I think, of us needing to, like, for me to, you know, personally, I feel like self-education is like what I'm focused on right now, because I feel like that is a way to empower ourselves to build solidarity, you know, to fight this bigger sort of power that's trying to keep us all like in ignorance and polarized, right? And one of the things Yuri talked about constantly was polarization, right? That this was this very, very, very dangerous thing, right? Polarization, and like we're watching that happen, you know, before our eyes, all kinds of polarization, right? That has people at each other instead of working together.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to say, you answered my question a little bit, but I do want to ask you to delve in a little bit more. What does it mean to you to inherit this legacy of resistance? And not just biologically or culturally, but spiritually and ethically. And how does that guide you in your day-to-day life?
That's a great question. What does it mean? I feel like I definitely do feel a ancestral obligation, or, you know, to do this work, but in a very positive way. You know, I think I mentioned to you, my father was a Black Panther, my stepfather was a Black Panther. You know, then, you know, my mother was an activist, and my whole family, you know, everybody, everyone in our whole family, and our
it didn't just jump a generation.
No, right, exactly, right, and our whole extended family, right, and so I think, you know, just being in that atmosphere, right, of people doing that, I think it's like kind of contagious. It's sort of hard not to, you know, what did Yuri used to say, the movement is contagious or something like that, right? Because I think it is, right, and it's very energizing and very empowering, and it's a great sort of social network to be, you know, people are cool and it's fun and people are talented and smart and educated, you know, so I think I just feel like very drawn to it very naturally, you know, to doing this work, and I love talking to people. I think, you know, I'm still getting a degree in cultural anthropology right now, and I think it's really because I'm a people watcher and I like to watch people, and I think I loved growing up in Yuri's house. As you guys know, one of the things that she used to do, as you walked in the door, she would introduce you, say your name, and then, introduce you to every single person, go around the room and name every single person. And then everyone got a label, like what they did, where they're from,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was such a funny thing to watch, over and over and over again, and the way that played out. And in our family, people used to joke sometimes, Yuri, maybe everybody doesn't want a label. Maybe you should, you let people just be. And she would be like, it's just a conversation starter. It's just a way for you to start a conversation, and I thought it was really funny that, she was very like, she had big dreams for people to connect and everything, but then also really practical ways for people to just get along, and I think that also just being in that, watching that was very beautiful. And one of the things that I loved is, I don't know if you guys know this, but in like I think it was in the 80s, she started volunteering at the Interchurch Center, teaching ESL, English as a Second Language. So for about a decade, maybe long, it might have even been longer than that, I can't remember, she had all these students, these foreign students, and she would then invite them into the mix too, on top of everything. So they got invited to Thanksgiving, Easter, anyone who didn't have any place to go. And we just thought this was so funny as a family because they have no context for anything, Yuri's involved in. And, she would, invite them into that space, and just watching that play out. And often these people didn't even have much English, and she would often sit me next to someone and say, this person is from, name your country, and say, talk to them, and she would walk away, and I'd have to find a way, and she did this to me over and over and over again. And I tell my kids this, and they're like, that would be terrible, that's horrible. And I'm like, I don't know, it wasn't that terrible, I figured it out, it was fun, it was kind of a challenge. And I think all of that, again, I think it just felt very natural and very fun to me and very energizing, I think. And I don't know if I just got that from Yuri and all of, just being in that environment. But I think I see how much beauty and the longevity of those relationships, right? Those are not like, people meet up and, they do this, thing together and then never see each other again. The people who met in that space or in those organizations or movements or parties or whatever was happening, people, I can't even count how many people stayed in community with each other, forever, still now. So I think that's also, that all really, made me want to do that, to be in this work. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it definitely answers the question. And you made me think of something that you all were talking about earlier when y'all was saying that it felt normal, that your childhood felt normal. And mine didn't feel normal. And when I say that, I'm not saying it in a bad way. And, I'll be 58. Well, I am 58 because I'm that.
More days.
But it always felt special to me because it just felt like I had something that other people didn't. I had access to people, like to be able, when I first saw Yuri on a Google homepage, that picture of her, and I was like, wow, I know her, like I spent time with her. She was at my wedding, like she's, like so many things, the stories, and, being around so many people like that, like that's why it felt so special. So normal is not even a word I would say.
Yeah, maybe
kind of diminishes.
Yeah, I understand.
You know what I mean? Like, like, oh no, we are abnormal. Happily abnormal. Yeah. And knowing that you could go to certain places and the people in those spaces, you didn't have to explain anything about who you are, where you come from, what your parents do, why you're there, why you greet each other in free to land, assalamu alaikum, hotel, none of that. You didn't have to, because everybody understood what it was. And culturally, we might not have all been the same, but, the ideology and the thinking and fighting for people and their rights, and that, you know, just really a beautiful thing. So Normal, no, we were special.
Yeah, you're right. Very
We're
special. Yeah.
And we
No,
still
you know,
are,
it's funny,
because
you know,
we can share these stories.
when I was in college, you know, I was in college in Atlanta. I was, you know, in the AU and everything in the 90s and stuff. And, I don't, all the stuff was happening with Pac and everything. And I was just like, he's a revolutionary. I was trying to explain to my friends, like, he's a revolutionary. You don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Did you ever run into Chaka at the AU Center?
No, never.
So crazy.
But it's really funny. It's just funny, at the time, just looking back, at different moments in time, people just didn't have the context,
Yeah.
And, I don't know if we went to the same, we went to this, I don't know, I don't know if you guys went there, but I went to the children's storefront. It was like the Black nationalist Montessori school, and it was on I think it was 97th in Columbus, but me
nationalist Montessori. Wow.
Yeah, and so Matulu was a teacher there for a while with my dad, and so my dad was a teacher there, and Matulu and Tupac and I were the students there. Lots of people, but I loved it because everybody's parents was a Black Panther, and it felt like, like you said, like very like, we were in a club in school every day. So that was really fun that I got to do that, and now that building is a big condo, and that whole, I think there's like a Sephora on that block or something. But
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you ever do any writings like on your own childhood? I know that you spend so much time in your grandmother's archives, but do you have archives of your own?
I am actually I just started to realize I have my own archive, which is like, I need to think about that. I take a lot of photos. Like I've been, taking photos for all these years, and I realized like, wow, I have a lot of photos, and I'm going through Yuri's photos. And so I have a couple thousand of Yuri's photos that she took from her camera, of marches and all the events she went to, but also all the stuff in her house, right? So that's how I think I sent you guys the, I sent you the photos, right? Because I have all these photos that she took in her house of every event. So I've been like thinking about what that would look like, like a book about these images, right? Like over time, but also like my perspective on growing up in this environment. I've been thinking about a lot of that, about writing about that. And I definitely, there's definitely a book in the works, me thinking about, how to talk about that story, because I do think, it's important, and someone should tell it, and her memoir, I edited her memoir with her, and it's called Passing It On. And it's great. We got to, get her to tell her some stories, but it's very piecemeal. And she was like, really didn't want to write a book about herself. It was a very hard thing to get Yuri to write about herself. So I feel like it's not the story the way I would have told it. And then I just realized like, I could just tell the story myself.
Yeah, because you have your upbringing, and then you also have like the last 25 years of, maintaining and, negotiating for this archive. So, so much richness there. And I look forward to your book or whatever it is that you
Thank
present to us. Yeah.
And now it's going to make us have to do what we've been, we're doing some things, and that's what this podcast, one of the main reasons we're doing this podcast is to share the stories, but there's so many stories.
There is, so it is so important.
Yeah. And I think doing it too, to just encourage others, because one of the things when we do this podcast and we, speak, it's kind of like, I don't even like to say interview one another, because it's more like whenever we get on this podcast, I feel like it just opens up the floodgates of sharing, and you just feel comfortable because we all, in some ways did this together at some point. And so I feel like even every time we do this process and we share with another Cub cousin or movement cousin or sister brother, it just, gives you that energy more and more like, okay, yes, we have to keep telling our story. We have to keep carrying on this legacy. It's so important. And yes, like when you sent those pictures, I couldn't tell you. I could tell you. I put it in my sibling chat, and the jokes that went on about our dad, what he had on, like our brother looking great. Like it was just like we were all like, "What is?"
And so funny. I love
because most of the times when we would go to the house after we drove
right
home to New York, and we would go straight off the highway, off West Side Highway. We going to Yuri's. I would be like, "Yay!" Looking tired, hair looking crazy. It would be 9 o'clock at night,
and she'd be wide
pulling up.
always ready to have people
to receive. Yeah, for sure.
And for us, it was like, because we all know Yuri was so small, so we were like, yay, because it was like she would really engage with us as the children. And that's why when actually Kalanji brought it up to me one day, he said, I was in California and I saw something on somebody's refrigerator. I said, okay, like it wasn't. And he said, yeah, it was your drawings from 6 years old on Yuri Kochiyama. And he was like, I didn't even know y'all knew her like that. I was like, well, I couldn't even
Baba Ahmed would go because Akemi, I don't know, you know, Chaka's daughter, Tayo, she was born in Vallejo. Her mother's from there. Okay. And so my father used to go all the time to take her back or pick her up, you know, to bring her to Atlanta for summer or holiday or whatever. So he would plan it so that he could go and see Yuri and spend some time with her. And then go get Tayo and then come back, you know. So
so great. I know. And I used to see so many people at the I used to see a lot of people at the pilgrimage all the time. Like over the years, you know, sometimes you would see people at the pilgrimage like after not seeing them for a long time. But I haven't been in a long time, but it's just so interesting. Like, you know, I've been going through all these photos and I have about 20 years of pilgrimage photos, and I definitely have him in those pictures too as well.
Yeah, that's definitely an archive right there. Just the pictures, you know, and there was appreciation for the pictures too, because as you know, because of the raids and the separations of so many years,
we lost
our life. We don't have a lot of pictures. So we brought those. We was like it was things that we've never seen our father look like that, or we don't remember it, right? You know, so
ourselves.
So it's just good to, you know, to have those memories and then to be able to connect them to something so wholesome as, you know, being at Yuri's house and then having dinner or just us just going there because they had a meeting. But like I said, a lot of times, you know, I think what stuck out to us most, or what continues to stick out to us, is the connection she made with us as children, and not just, okay, y'all children, y'all go sit in another room, but she engaged with us, and that she made sure that anytime we were around or wherever we were, we could engage with her. And it wasn't, okay, we're at a, you know, of course, you know, we knew the times to be serious, but she always made sure that the children felt welcome. Like you said, she loved the youth. And that's an important factor that a lot of people, I think, as when they become elders or older, they get misguided, and that the youth, you still need to stay connected to the youth because that's the future.
That's where it is.
Right. When you leave, if they don't know anything, they've never had a connection, then that part of you is not going to live on, you know. So I truly appreciate that about her, because that's something. Every time somebody says Yuri Kochiyama, I smile from my childhood. You know, it's not nothing from my adulthood outside of just being proud of who she was. But as a child, though, especially during those times, as you said, they were hard times. And to have someone like her there to always, you know, just, you knew you felt welcome. And like I said, we were little, and she was so little that it felt like, you know, we won't come.
Same size.
It's a beautiful process. And I just, you know, I truly thank you again for sending that, because it brought up a whole lot. And we laughed. We made jokes, memes.
It transported us.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad. I love finding it. No, it was great because I think I found those right after I saw you at Matula's memorial. I think it was something. It was around that time. Yeah. So it was like funny that I had just seen you, and then I found those pictures.
Yeah.
No coincidences. No coincidences.
None at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So interesting. So.
Yeah.
So we end our shows with something that we call the Power Five.
Okay.
And it is 5 rapid fire. It could be phrases or words.
Okay.
We'll share them with you, and you'll just say with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay. It's interesting. Okay.
So
the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yes, when you hear the phrase or the word.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing is continuum.
Legacy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The second is a book that everyone should read.
Wretched of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Solidarity.
Mm.
Love.
Mm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Your favorite revolutionary. Mm-hmm.
That's very hard to put it in a thing. So I'll say one of my favorite revolutionaries.
Okay.
One of the revolutionaries that most inspired me, I would say, is Mdaiyah Yisrael.
Mm.
Mm. And the final one is your prayer for the next generation.
I would pray that they know their history,
mm-hmm.
And they center themselves in love and humanity.
Mm. I
love it.
I say.
So before we get out of here, could you share the name of the book again for everyone and let them know where they can find it?
Oh, Yuri's memoir.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Passion for Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could just get it on Amazon. I'm pretty sure. It was UCLA Asian American Studies Press that published it.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure it's that's how you can order it. You might be able. I don't know if you can actually order it from their press, but if you just Google it, but that's where I think I've ordered it the last time.
Okay. So Passion for Justice, and then the other one that you co-edited.
Oh, that's the one I co-edited.
Okay, pass it on. Passing it on.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Passion for Justice is the movie. Sorry. There's also a really good documentary called Passion for Justice, right?
Okay.
By Third World Women's Newsreel.
Okay.
Which is really good, which aged really well. They did it in 1999, and I watched it recently, and it's actually still really good. And then Passing It On. I think it's called Passing It On: a memoir by Yuri Kochiyama, and that's the one I co-edited. And yeah.
And so that can be found
on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
it is. It's there.
Okay.
I know people have a preference for where they want folks to go.
Yeah, right now I feel like that is where it is.
Okay.
You know what? I should look and see if UCLA is still able to sell it directly.
Okay.
And then also with the organization, the movement that you're working with, Yuri's memoirs and the legacy. And
oh yes. So we have we created a website.
Okay.
YuriKochiyama.com. It's really simple. So part of what we did in the last couple of years is we started this organization, the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project. And then, so as, to build our freedom schools, to, start to organize more, like formalize a lot of the partnerships that we created through doing all these workshops and different things that we've done over the last 10 years. I realized we needed like organizational entity to do it. And then we launched the YuriKochiyama.com website a few years ago so that people could have a place to go if they want. Because one of the things people are always trying to get is like rights to speeches or to video or to any things that they find on YouTube or whatever. So we wanted to make it easier for people to get in touch with us, but also people want to so that people can find archives. So on the website there's a page where you can find like resources, videos, books, articles, but also the archives, like, and how do you so you can link to the archives directly from the website. And then we also have a page for the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project also, where people can get in touch with us as well. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So those are the best ways to just sort of get everything in one place. Also on the YuriKochiyama.com website we have like a timeline, and we try to have like more facts, because as someone said earlier, history is not only being suppressed, but it's also being appropriated. And so, one of the things also that sort of has sort of motivated me to get more involved in managing Yuri's legacy and intellectual property is I have seen really inappropriate uses, right, of quotes from her, of her image sometimes that I realized, like, oh, you do have to pay attention, right? And someone has to be paying attention. So, I've seen a quote from Yuri on a Kmart poster.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like a liberation quote, right? Like about crossing borders and broadening your horizons. And then they had like a beach with like footsteps in the sand, and she was the quote, the line right before that, she said, because I know the speech is decolonize your mind, right? But they took out the decolonize your mind, and then they took the broaden your horizons, cross borders,
Wow.
Yeah.
Beach, on the beach.
But yeah, so this is, it's one of the reasons also is that we realize we need to get more involved in all of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, not only for, being our guest, but just for being you, doing the work, carrying on the traditions, carrying on the legacy. I know your grandmother is proud.
Thank you.
As are all the people that she came in contact with, because, through her legacy continuing, so does the legacy of all those that she was interconnected with. So thank you. Thank you. And
I'm so glad to be connected to you guys still and to be in this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful thing.
We say all the time, like for Princess Mdaiyah was saying earlier, like these conversations, they always beg for more. It's never enough. So as we say to most of our guests, we'll see you for part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down for it.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thank
you.
All the best.
All right.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
There we go. All right.
I loved it. I knew Yuri had so much stuff.
Yeah,
I had a lot of stuff in the apartment.
Yeah. Oh yes, that apartment was full. You walked in, it was packed.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, but I'm so impressed.
I would love to see photos.
Yeah.
More photos.
Yes. So I love the fact, I love the because there was so much that Akemi said that I wanted to follow up on. But I know a lot of that stuff, will be done in looking at the archives. Because, I was so interested in okay, what are, what was one of the most fascinating, pieces of a collected piece, that's archive. But yeah, I am impressed, and I really love the fact that the access, is there for public, and particularly for, newer generations, and that it's in the same, community neighborhood that she lived in all these years. So that's really special.
Her neighborhood.
And that just shows you, how you have to stay connected, and the fact that you know, I just appreciate, because a lot of times, you know, when legacies or not legacies, but legends, our heroes and heroes pass on, the family kind of get discombobulated in what to do. So I love the fact that they stayed organized and took a lot, you know, I could see a lot of Yuri in Akemi.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And that
Definitely.
she took all of that and said, okay, we're going to do this way. And, you know, like she said, they didn't just say, okay, Columbia, but they looked at all the different possibilities and looked at what was best for not just them, but for the people, for what the legacy, you know, entailed, and having it that close, you know. So, and I think that's always important when we look at how we carry on the legacy. You know, we look at the overall picture of it, because that's how our parents did. You know, they didn't just say, okay, we're going to work in this corner of the world. They worked in the whole world. They looked at the struggles of everyone. And so I just, you know, it just truly makes you appreciate more and more the way that they taught us, you know, because you could see it in each other. When we do these conversations, it's like, see it again and again. And you're like, they knew what they were doing, you know, and that's
definitely.
Yeah, and it just also solidifies why they were all so connected. You know, not many people can, even people who say, oh yeah, we went through, you know, Yuri Kochiyama's house, but not a lot of people can really say we spent time there. Like we, you know, this was our space of safety, love, peace, you know, a moment of just getting away from the hectic of the world and going into this haven. And so, you know, it's just good that, like she said, that I'm happy we're still connected to her, because I know her grandmother is happy that, you know, we're all still connected, because they did this, and they didn't do it for all of us to be like, okay. They did it so that we could stay connected throughout our years for generations, because the story, it don't end with them, you know, it just continues and continues. So I just, the more we do this, it's just like, okay.
It just takes me back to, you know, the memories, and I get a little sad sometimes, but happy that, you know, we had that time with them.
No,
and
it makes me think
it's
special, but it makes me think, like, I was telling somebody the other day, like, it's just like you just never in your life, you'd be like, oh, these people are going to be here forever, you know?
Right.
Even when, you know, Yuri passed, it was just like, nah, you know, like I just didn't even conceptualize it to that degree. And it's like, the more and more everybody's leaving, it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is really like, you know, we're grown, we understand it, but it's still different. Like, these are people who were bigger than the world in so many ways to us. So it's like, yeah, they can't be gone, you know. And we know, physically, but it's still like, you would think they could overcome everything.
Yeah, because that's how special, you know, they felt. And as we talked about earlier, how special they made you feel. And I was thinking about that house and just the history, you know, knowing that you had, like, you know, Black arts movement pioneers, like reading poetry in your living room and, you know, doing play readings and like things that, you know, people just, I guess you would imagine in a movie, you know, that was happening. And so that was a part of the energy that we felt.
Yeah. So before you even do that, and we didn't do it with Akemi on the phone, on the line, talk about the parents and Yuri.
We
and did. You know, how she connected them.
Oh yeah. I remember Daddy said that. I was like, oh,
beautiful story.
Yeah, that was I think when we were at the hospital, and Daddy was telling us about his list of attributes.
Yes,
our father had a list
required.
He had a list of requirements, but
and a list of women, and he put certain markings by who met the most.
Who had the most character.
And we said, oh, you had a list, but like, oh, okay.
And Sister Falani rose to the top.
As you can see.
And was highly recommended by Kochiyama. Yeah.
Woo!
Thank you, Yuri. Right, yeah, thank you, Yuri, for that.
Hey, you know.
Yeah.
We love it. Yeah.
Great episode.
Great episode. Like
I'm
like all of them. You know, it's always just because you get more and more and more.
Yeah.
It's like and you know what it is? I feel like it's kind of like just bringing back more of what we've missed so much of growing up, because you know, like Aiyisha, you said, it wasn't, you don't look at it as normal, but special. But then also in that specialness, there was a lot of stuff that was just either shoved to the back or forgotten, because some stuff we just had to keep moving so fast and keep going. So when we have these and we just talking to other pockets of our life, because that's what it for me, it's like filling up questions, or just like, oh, I remember something. That's why I remember that, or that's why that happened. And so it just, you know, it really is fulfilling. And I'm just really grateful that we're able, you know, that we've come together to be able to do this.
Yeah, this is a form of therapy for me.
Yeah,
it's affirming. It's affirming because things happen. Like, you know, I think we're reiterating, you know, that same sentiment that things happen at such a fast pace. And then even the things that are happening are so layered and complicated. And you just cannot process it in the moment. And so a lot of this really is processing in this moment. In this moment. And so it's really affirming even to hear, like, oh no, that was my experience too. Or that, you know, that's what I took from that. Because there's so much in the memory bank. There's so much in the memory bank. And I say that as the youngest. So Aiyisha has 16 plus years, you know, to my memory bank. So I'm always grateful and just affirmed, you know, in what we're doing and in the work that, you know, our fellow Seeds of Revolution are doing out there.
And this is what our parents wanted us to do, carry on the legacy in the best way we know how. And they taught us, you know, there's so many different ways to do it. So which we, you know, often say, it's our lane and we're going to stand in our lane.
And I love what Akemi said, and I share that sentiment. And I think we all do that. You know, we're doing this because it's in our hearts to do. It's not like, oh, I'm doing this to make my parents proud, or you know, I'm carrying on the legacy. That's a part of it, you know. But I'm really just, it's like breath, really, to me. You know what I'm saying? It's second nature. I'm doing what my spirit, what my instincts, you know, tell me to do. And you know, collectively we're doing that. So
and it's funny you said that, because I was out today. I was doing some other work in the community. We started a summer camp for 2 weeks. This is our last couple of days. And I know.
Shout out to you.
So, but then there was a food giveaway not too far away from us. We had 2 food giveaways this week, and I went to both to help. And as I was there today, one of the sisters there who I used to associate with a lot, she said, you know, we really miss you. We just miss, because every Friday you used to make food and everybody be at your house, and nobody does that. And she was like, it's just something about you. You're always involved and you're always bringing people together. And it was something that Akemi said tonight that just sparked in me, like, this is why it's probably why I do it, because it's been done so much around me. You know, we did it all the time in our household, going to Yuri's house, you know, whatever, grandma's house, these, you know, the places we always felt like, hey, we make a safe space for us.
Right.
And in order to do that, we have to have an inviting space where we are. And there's one way to be safe and inviting, you know. And I used to, and I'll be honest, I used to get a little like, oh boy, we got to do this again. It's Friday, we got to do Friday dinner again. But you know, the more and more I truly think about it, and the more people who be like, I love, that's something that I always will always take away from being connected to you, that, you always made sure that Friday nights food was ready for everybody. People didn't have to bring anything. And I mean, of course, it was shocking to me when she said, nobody else is doing it, because in a community, that's something that should always be done. I feel anyway in my heart that there's always a time, whether it be one night or a couple of nights, that everybody eats together, because that's how you truly become family. You truly become family when you're able to get into those close knit spaces together and just even hang out, because that's what families do. So I just pray that a lot of people get from, everything that was said tonight. But one of the major things is, building a safe space for whomever needs it in your life, in your circle, and however you see fit. It doesn't have to mimic what Yuri did or what our parents have done or other ancestors and leaders are doing or have done. But, make it your own, so that because it is a part of your legacy. That becomes what you are, what is carried on through your children, and what people will remember about you. And what she say, a radical hospitality?
Radical hospitality. Yeah.
That was okay. Yeah, I like that. Because it can encompass so many things. Radical, when people hear radical, they want to hear, they instantly think of some type of violent thing. But radical meaning the change of how she did with so many different people. Yeah, that's powerful. And her little self.
Yeah, that was spirit work. That was spirit work for sure.
Yeah.
Even thinking about the archive,
right.
Archives are, as we know, it could be made of all kinds of things.
Right.
And I don't know how intentional, she was. We would have to ask her. Or I'm sure Akemi has some thoughts, or, when folks are reading the memoir, there might be some thoughts about that. But as I listened, and even, visiting and seeing all the things, I was like, this is really spirit work. And this is really beyond just, your traditional archives that one might leave behind. They're all it's like they're pathways and messages, to a place and time that, like I said earlier, we can only imagine, through looking at a film, and even that wouldn't capture it. So I'm grateful that the archive exists. I encourage, our listeners, our viewers, we will put the link in the bio for the archives. I love that everybody can access it. And shoot, I probably will include it in some of my curriculum going forward.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, we can do it. Yep, at GHA and at where I am. So, with that said, everybody, thank you so much for watching another episode of Seeds of Revolution, Daughters of the Whirlwind.
Thank you.
You'll see that you can support us through our Cash App that's listed right below. We don't have sponsors at this moment. You are our sponsor. Show us a little love or a lot of love. Right. You are the sponsor, and you are the sponsor.
And be sure to look up Yuri Kochiyama.
Yes.
YuriKochiyama.com.
Yes. Like, comment, subscribe.
Daddy used to say, Google her. He'll say, Google her.
Google her. Yeah. And Google shows Yuri love. They love her.
Yes.
So Google her.
Yep. All right.
Be blessed.
I was waiting for you, Aiyisha. Peace.
Look for me in the whirlwind.
Hey, revolutionaries. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Seeds of Revolution, Daughters of the Whirlwind podcast. To join the family, like, subscribe, and share with who you think should be a part of the fam. comment if y'all want us to cover specific topics or if you have questions. Peace.